The rain fell in sheets, washing the blood from the slick tarmac, but it couldn't wash away the stinging truth. Luna pressed a trembling hand to her side, the crimson stain spreading across her white blouse, a stark contrast to the darkness pressing in around her. "You're weak, Luna." David's voice cut through the storm, colder than the wind, biting her skin. He stood over her, his expression a mask of indifference, the silver alpha insignia on his lapel catching the faint streetlights. "The pack needs strength. You are a liability. I, David, reject you as my mate and cast you out." He turned his back, stepping into the waiting black SUV, leaving her bleeding on the desolate highway. He left her there, utterly betrayed. He left her to die. The asphalt was rough against Luna's cheek, the grit grinding into her skin as the taillights of David's SUV bled into the rainy night. She couldn't feel the cold anymore. A creeping numbness had started at her toes and was slowly clawing its way up her body. The silence of the abandoned industrial park was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain and her own ragged, shallow breaths. Every gasp was a battle, a sharp pain radiating from the jagged wound in her side. She tried to move, to drag herself toward the faint glow of a street lamp 50 yards away, but her limbs refused to obey. The scent of her own blood, metallic and cloying, hung heavy in the damp air. It was a beacon, a dinner bell for any rogue or scavenger lurking in the shadows. He left me. The thought was more agonizing than the physical wound. David, the man she had loved since they were teenagers, the man who had promised to protect her when he took the alpha title of the Crescent Moon Pack just 2 months ago. They were supposed to lead together. Instead, he had lured her out here under the guise of investigating a border dispute, only to stand by while a group of masked rogues ambushed them. No, he hadn't just stood by. As the rogues overpowered her, as a silver-laced blade found its mark in her ribs, David had stepped forward, not to fight, but to deliver the final, crushing blow. The rejection, the severing of the mate bond. It felt as though a physical tether had been violently snapped within her chest, leaving a hollow, echoing void. The rejection from an alpha was meant to be a slow, agonizing decline. Combined with the silver poisoning her bloodstream, it was a death sentence. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the rain-slicked pavement. Luna forced her eyes open, her vision swimming. 2 shadowy figures emerged from the gloom, their eyes glowing a sickly, feral yellow. Rogues. They hadn't gone far. They were waiting to finish the job, or perhaps just waiting to scavenge what was left. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced through the numbness. She tried to push herself up, her fingers scrabbling uselessly against the wet stone. "Look at the mighty Luna now," one of the rogues sneered, his voice raspy and cruel. He kicked a loose pebble, sending it skittering towards her face. "Not so proud when the alpha tosses you out like garbage, eh?" She couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, filled with copper. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable end. She refused to give them the satisfaction of hearing her beg. If this was how she was going to die, betrayed and abandoned in the dirt, she would do it in silence. Suddenly, a blinding light cut through the darkness, accompanied by the deafening roar of an engine. A heavy-duty truck, painted a dull matte black, skidded to a halt between Luna and the rogues. The headlights pinned the 2 feral wolves, blinding them. The driver's side door slammed open, and a figure stepped out. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a heavy canvas jacket. He didn't shift, but the sheer force of the aura radiating from him was palpable, even to Luna's fading senses. It wasn't the oppressive, demanding power of an alpha like David. It was something older, denser, like the oppressive weight of a deep ocean trench. "You're trespassing," the stranger said, his voice a low, calm rumble that somehow carried over the storm. The rogues hesitated, their bravado faltering. "This is Crescent Moon territory," the first one spat. "We're just cleaning up their mess." "Not anymore," the man replied softly. He moved with terrifying speed. There was no theatrical display, just a blur of motion. A sickening crack echoed in the night, followed by a choked gurgle. One rogue crumpled to the ground, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The second rogue didn't wait to see more. He bolted into the darkness, tail tucked between his legs. The stranger didn't pursue. He turned slowly, the harsh headlights casting long, dramatic shadows across his face. He possessed stark, chiseled features, a strong jawline, and eyes that seemed to hold the stormy night sky within them. He looked down at Luna, his expression unreadable. "You're a mess," he observed quietly, crouching beside her. Luna tried to speak, but only a wet cough escaped her lips. The darkness was finally winning, pulling her down into its comforting embrace. "Hold on," the stranger commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the encroaching void. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently but firmly pressing against the wound on her side. The heat of his touch was a jolt to her fading system, a spark of life in the freezing rain. It was the last thing she felt before the world faded entirely to black. Consciousness returned not as a sudden awakening, but as a slow, painful ascent through layers of murky pain. Luna first became aware of a scent: wood smoke, pine needles, and a faint, underlying metallic tang of old blood. It was a sharp contrast to the sterile, pine-scented halls of the Crescent Moon packhouse. She opened her eyes, wincing at the dim light filtering through heavy canvas curtains. She was lying on a narrow cot in a small, utilitarian room. The walls were rough-hewn timber, and the air was thick and warm, heated by a small cast-iron stove in the corner. Panic flared, sharp and sudden. Where was she? Where was David? The memory of the rain, the blade, and the cold, unfeeling rejection hit her like a physical blow. She gasped, her hand flying to her side. Thick white bandages were wrapped tightly around her torso. The pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache, but the burning agony of the silver was gone. "You shouldn't move." The voice came from the shadows near the doorway. Luna turned her head, the movement sending a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. It was the man from the industrial park. In the daylight, he looked even more imposing. He wore a simple gray Henley and dark jeans, leaning casually against the doorframe, a mug of steaming liquid in his hand. His eyes, a striking, stormy gray, assessed her with unnerving intensity. "Who are you?" Luna's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're somewhere safe," he replied, his tone even, giving away nothing. He stepped fully into the room, setting the mug on a small wooden crate beside the cot. "Drink this. It will help with the remaining silver toxicity." Luna eyed the dark, murky liquid with suspicion. "I don't know you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Silas, and considering I scraped you off the pavement and spent the last 3 days pulling silver out of your bloodstream, I'd say you owe me the benefit of the doubt." 3 days? She had been unconscious for 3 days. The realization sent a chill down her spine. "David," she breathed, the name tasting like ash on her tongue. Silas's expression hardened. "The Alpha of the Crescent Moon." "Yes, I saw his handiwork. He left you to bleed out while rogues circled." "Why did you save me?" Luna demanded, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. She forced herself to sit up slightly, ignoring the screaming protest of her muscles. She needed to be on guard. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Silas pulled up a worn wooden chair and sat down, resting his forearms on his knees. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Let's just say I don't care for the way David runs his territory. And I have a particular distaste for bullies who leave their messes for others to clean up. You're not part of his pack. It wasn't a question. He didn't smell like Crescent Moon. He didn't smell like any pack she recognized. No, I'm not part of any pack. A rogue, then. But he didn't fit the profile. Rogues were feral, unkempt, driven by madness or desperation. Silas was controlled, precise, and exuded an aura of quiet, dangerous power that rivaled any alpha she had ever met. Drink, he instructed again, nodding toward the mug. Reluctantly, Luna reached for the mug. Her hand trembled so badly she almost spilled it. Silas watched her struggle, his face impassive, making no move to help. It was a test, she realized. He was assessing her strength, her will. She gritted her teeth, steadying her hand with sheer stubbornness, and brought the rim to her lips. The liquid tasted foul, bitter roots and herbs. But as it slid down her throat, a wave of warmth followed, soothing the raw, aching feeling in her chest. Better? He asked. Luna nodded curtly, setting the empty mug down. Thank you for saving my life. Don't thank me yet, Silas said, leaning back in his chair. Surviving the silver was the easy part. Surviving the rejection. That's where the real fight begins. He was right. The mate bond, even forcibly severed, left a psychic wound that was notoriously difficult to heal. Most wolves went mad or simply wasted away, unable to bear the profound loss and the biological imperative tearing them apart from the inside out. I will survive, Luna stated, her voice surprisingly firm. The sadness and betrayal were still there, a heavy weight in her chest. But beneath them, a tiny, hard ember of something else was beginning to glow. Anger. Silas tilted his head, watching her closely. Survival isn't enough, Luna. Not if you want to understand why he did it. Not if you want to ensure he never does it again. He knew her name. Of course he did. She was the former Luna of the Crescent Moon. Her face was known throughout the region. What are you suggesting? She asked, her eyes narrowing. I'm suggesting that resting is a waste of time, Silas said, standing up. He moved to a battered wooden trunk at the foot of the bed and kicked it open. Inside lay an assortment of weapons, knives, short swords, and training gear. If you want to heal, truly heal, he continued, turning back to face her. You need a purpose stronger than the pain. You need to become something they never saw coming. He gestured to the trunk. When you can stand without passing out, meet me outside. We have work to do. The air outside the cabin was crisp and biting, smelling of damp earth and impending winter. Luna leaned heavily against the rough wooden doorframe, her legs trembling violently. Just walking the 10 steps from the cot to the door had felt like running a marathon. Every breath pulled at her healing side, a sharp reminder of her weakness. Silas stood in a small clearing 50 yards away, methodically chopping wood. He moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic grace, the heavy axe rising and falling, splitting the thick logs with precise, powerful strikes. He didn't look up as she approached, though she knew he heard her uneven footsteps. She stopped a few feet away, leaning against a sturdy oak tree for support. I'm here, she announced, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Silas paused, resting the head of the axe on the chopping block. He turned to her, his gaze sweeping over her pale face and trembling frame. You look like a stiff breeze would knock you over. I can stand, she retorted, stubbornly lifting her chin. Standing isn't fighting, he observed dryly. He walked over to the trunk he had dragged outside earlier and pulled out 2 dull, wooden training swords. He tossed one toward her. Luna scrambled to catch it, the sudden movement tearing a gasp from her lips as a fresh jolt of pain shot through her side. She barely managed to grab the handle, the tip of the wooden blade thudding heavily against the dirt. Pick it up, Silas commanded softly. She gritted her teeth, forcing her trembling fingers to tighten around the grip. It felt impossibly heavy. I can't fight like this. Your side is healing. Your mind is what's broken, Silas said, stepping closer. His voice was devoid of sympathy. David didn't just stab you, Luna. He broke your spirit. He made you believe you were weak, a liability. And right now, you're proving him right. The words stung, hitting closer to home than she cared to admit. The memory of David's cold eyes, his dismissive tone, "You are a liability," echoed in her mind. Anger, hot and bright, flared, pushing back the pain for a brief, blinding moment. With a guttural cry, Luna swung the wooden sword, aiming a clumsy, desperate arc at his chest. Silas didn't even blink. He barely moved, just shifted his weight slightly, and brought his own wooden blade up in a swift, casual block. The crack of wood on wood echoed through the clearing. The impact jarred Luna's arm all the way to her shoulder, sending her stumbling backward. She lost her footing on a slick patch of moss and fell hard onto her backside. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the gray sky, the pain in her side throbbing in time with her racing heart. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes. He was right. She was weak. Silas stood over her, looking down with that same unreadable expression. Again. I can't, she whispered, turning her face away. Yes, you can. His voice dropped, losing its commanding edge, replacing it with something darker, more resonant. You think you're the only one who's been betrayed? You think you're the only one who's been left for dead? The world doesn't care about your broken heart, Luna. It only respects strength. He reached down and hauled her roughly to her feet. The sudden movement sent a wave of nausea rolling through her, but his grip on her arm was ironclad, keeping her upright. You were the Luna of the crescent moon, he said, his face inches from hers, his stormy eyes boring into her soul. You were supposed to be their mother, their protector. But you let David coddle you. You let him convince you that your strength lay in supporting him, not in standing on your own. That's a lie, she hissed, yanking her arm free, though she swayed dangerously without his support. I trained. I fought. You sparred. Silas corrected dismissively. You played at fighting. You never had to fight for your life, because you always believed he would be there to save you. He gestured toward the woods, in the direction of her old packlands. Well, he's not here. And out here there are no titles. There's only the quick and the dead. Which one are you? The brutal honesty of his words stripped away the last of her defenses. She had relied on David. She had believed his promises, and that reliance had nearly cost her everything. The ember of anger in her chest flared into a raging inferno. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She just tightened her grip on the wooden sword, ignored the screaming pain in her side, and swung again. This time, the swing was faster, driven by pure, unadulterated fury. Silas blocked it again, but he had to take a half step back to absorb the impact. "Better," he murmured. Again, and so it began. The crucible. For the next week, Luna lived a cycle of agonizing pain and relentless exhaustion. Silas pushed her past what she thought were her physical limits, and then pushed her further. They trained until her hands were blistered and bleeding, until she couldn't lift her arms, until she collapsed in the dirt, sobbing from the sheer physical toll. But every time she fell, he made her get back up. He didn't offer comfort. He offered harsh truths and demanding expectations. He taught her how to fight not like a pack wolf, bound by honor and rules, but like a survivor, fighting for every inch, every breath. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, a change began to occur. The physical pain of her wound dulled, replaced by the deep, satisfying ache of muscles being rebuilt, stronger than before. More importantly, the psychic void left by the severed mate bond stopped feeling like a bleeding wound and started feeling like a blank canvas. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, they sat by the fire outside the cabin. Luna was nursing a bruised ribs, but for the first time in weeks, her mind was clear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, watching the flames dance. "Why invest so much time in me?" Silas fed another log into the fire before answering. "I told you, I have a distaste for bullies." He paused, looking at her, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "But mostly because I saw a spark in you that night on the highway. A spark of defiance. David tried to extinguish it. I'm just giving it fuel." He looked back at the fire. "Besides, when you finally go back and face him, I want a front row seat to the show." Luna looked down at her calloused hands, hands that were learning to kill, learning to survive. She wasn't the woman who had begged for her life on the asphalt. That woman was dead. She looked up at Silas, a cold, hard resolve settling over her. "When I go back," she said, her voice steady and sure, "there won't be a show. There will only be a reckoning." Winter descended upon the mountains, not with a whisper, but with a sudden, suffocating grip. Snow piled in massive drifts against the walls of the cabin, transforming the surrounding forest into a silent, monochrome expanse. For Luna, the isolation was absolute, yet strangely liberating. There were no pack politics, no sympathetic whispers behind her back, and no David. There was only the bitter cold, the crackling iron stove, and Silas. The progression of her training shifted as the temperature plummeted. Since fighting in wolf form would leave her tracks easily identifiable to any wandering scouts, Silas insisted she master her human form to perfection. "A wolf relies on instinct," he told her one freezing morning, his breath pluming in the icy air. "A human relies on strategy. If you can outthink an opponent while in your weakest state, your wolf will be unstoppable." They stood in a small clearing they had painstakingly shoveled clear of snow. Luna wore simple dark leggings and a heavy woolen sweater, shivering despite the exertion of their warm-up. Silas, as always, seemed entirely unbothered by the cold, wearing only a long-sleeved thermal shirt. "Blindfold," he commanded, tossing a strip of dark cloth toward her. Luna caught it, her fingers clumsy in the cold. She didn't question him. She had learned over the past 2 months that every bizarre request had a distinct, usually painful, purpose. She tied the cloth securely over her eyes, plunging herself into absolute darkness. "Your eyes deceive you." Silas's voice floated around her, echoing slightly off the snowbanks. "They tell you an opponent is too big, too fast, or too far away. They feed your fear. Cut them out of the equation. Listen to the snow crunching. Feel the displacement of the air when I move. Smell the adrenaline. Luna took a deep, steadying breath. The scent of pine and frost filled her lungs, followed by the distinct, clean scent of Silas, like rain on warm stones and deep earth. She focused her hearing. The wind whistled through the bare branches of the oaks. Suddenly, a subtle shift in the air pressure brushed against her left side. She pivoted, bringing her forearm up in a defensive block just as Silas's heavy strike connected. The impact bruised, but she hadn't fallen. "Good," he murmured from somewhere to her right. But too slow on the recovery. Before she could process the critique, a sweep kick caught her ankles. She hit the packed snow hard, the air driven from her lungs. She rolled immediately, scrambling to her feet and dropping into a defensive crouch, ignoring the sting of the ice against her palms. "Anger makes you sloppy," Silas instructed, his voice circling her again. "I can smell the frustration spiking in you. It clouds your senses. Box it up. Use cold logic, not hot rage." For hours, they repeated the dance. She fell, she bruised, she learned. Slowly, the world around her began to map itself without sight. She learned the heavy, deliberate cadence of his footsteps when he was preparing a power strike, and the terrifying silence that meant he was moving in for a takedown. Late that evening, they sat by the cast-iron stove, the only light in the room radiating from the glowing embers behind the grate. Luna was carefully wrapping a sprained wrist with a bandage, wincing slightly as she pulled the fabric tight. Silas sat across from her, quietly polishing the edge of a hunting knife. The silence between them had long ceased to be uncomfortable. It was a shared, comfortable quiet. "You're holding back," Luna said suddenly, breaking the stillness. She looked up at him, studying the harsh, beautiful angles of his face in the firelight. "During the sparring, even when I anticipate your moves, you pull your punches at the last second." Silas didn't look up from the blade. "If I didn't pull my punches, I'd be spending another 3 days patching you up. We don't have the medical supplies for that." "That's not it," Luna pressed, her voice steady. "You move like an alpha. You fight with the dominance of an alpha. But you live out here like a ghost. Why?" The rhythmic scraping of the whetstone paused. Silas finally lifted his gaze, his stormy gray eyes locking onto hers. The intensity in the room shifted, the air growing suddenly thick and warm. "Because a title is a cage, Luna," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "Alphas are politicians. They manage resources, they placate egos, and they inevitably compromise their morals to maintain order." He set the knife down. "I belonged to a pack once, a strong one. When the Alpha decided that sacrificing our weakest members to a neighboring pack was a fair price for a peace treaty, I challenged him." Luna's breath hitched. A challenge for the Alpha position was a fight to the death. "What happened?" "I won," Silas stated flatly. "And then I walked away. Because taking his place would have meant ruling over wolves who had stood by and watched the betrayal happen. I refused to lead cowards." He looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction, the firelight catching a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "You aren't a coward, Luna. David broke you, but he didn't ruin you. You're forging yourself into a weapon. Just make sure when you finally strike, you know exactly who you are doing it for." She held his gaze, a quiet understanding passing between them. The subtle romantic tension, built on a foundation of mutual survival and respect, hummed in the narrow space between their chairs. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming something entirely new, and Silas was the only one who truly saw her. The brutal winter finally broke, yielding to a muddy, tempestuous spring. The snow melted into rushing streams, and the forest exploded with the scent of wet earth and budding green. With the thaw came the necessity of information. They had been isolated for 5 months. It was time to find out what David was doing with the Crescent Moon Pack. Keep your head down. Keep your scent masked with the wolfsbane oil, and do not speak unless spoken to. Silas instructed as he navigated his battered black truck down a rutted dirt road. They were heading to the Crossroads, a neutral trading post situated on the fringes of 3 different pack territories. It was a haven for rogues, mercenaries, and pack wolves looking to conduct off-the-books business. It was dangerous, volatile, and exactly where they needed to be. Luna nodded, pulling the hood of her dark, oversized jacket further over her face. The wolfsbane oil smelled bitter and stung her nose, effectively drowning out her natural scent. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, but it wasn't the paralyzing fear she would have felt a year ago. It was anticipation. The Crossroads was nothing more than a cluster of dilapidated corrugated metal buildings surrounded by a high chain-link fence. The main structure, a sprawling, dimly lit bar, reeked of cheap beer, unwashed bodies, and the underlying, aggressive musk of dominant wolves. As Silas pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the low roar of conversation dipped slightly. Several sets of eyes darted toward him. Luna noticed the way the patrons subtly shifted their weight, parting slightly to clear a path. Silas was known here, not by name perhaps, but by reputation. He was a predator among predators. He led her to a small, sticky booth in the darkest corner of the room. "Stay here," he murmured, his shoulder brushing hers as he stood. "I'm going to buy a few supplies and see what the bartender knows. Do not draw attention." Luna slid into the shadows of the booth, keeping her back to the wall. She watched Silas weave through the crowd, admiring the effortless, threatening grace of his movements before turning her attention to her surroundings. She tuned her hearing, filtering through the loud music and the clinking of glasses. She ignored the crude jokes of the rogues playing pool and focused on a booth 2 tables away, where 3 heavily scarred wolves wearing the faint, familiar scent of the crescent moon border were nursing drinks. "I'm telling you, it's a suicide mission." One of them, a bulky man with a jagged scar across his nose, muttered into his beer. "Expanding into the Bloodwood territory? Their alpha is a psycho. David doesn't care." The second man replied, keeping his voice low. "Since he took the Bloodwood Alpha's daughter as his new mate, he thinks he's untouchable. It was a political marriage, sure, but it gave him the numbers he needed." Luna's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a physical blow, sharper than the blade David had left in her ribs. A new mate. He hadn't just rejected her because he thought she was weak. He had orchestrated the entire ambush, the betrayal, and the rejection to clear the path for a political alliance that would double his territory. It was cold, calculated treason. A wave of dizzying emotion threatened to overwhelm her. The old Luna would have wept. She would have shattered right there in the booth. But the woman Silas had forged in the winter fires simply inhaled, forcing the pain down into a tight, hardened knot in her chest. Logic over emotion. David was expanding, which meant his borders would be stretched thin. He was arrogant. Arrogance was a vulnerability. Lost in her strategic calculations, Luna didn't notice the heavily intoxicated rogue stumbling toward her until he crashed into the table, sending her untouched water glass shattering to the floor. Well, the rogue slurred, leaning heavily on the table and peering under her hood. His breath was vile. "What's a little thing like you doing hiding in the dark? Why don't you come keep me company?" He reached a grimy hand out to grab her chin. Instinct, honed by months of brutal training, took over. Luna didn't shout or recoil. With terrifying speed, she reached up, grabbed his extended wrist, and twisted it sharply backward, while simultaneously driving her elbow hard into the nerve cluster on his forearm. The rogue gasped, dropping to his knees instantly as his arm went numb. "I prefer the dark," Luna said, her voice a calm, chilling whisper that carried perfectly to his ears. She didn't break his wrist, but she held the lock tight enough to let him know she easily could. "Walk away, or you won't be walking out at all." She released him with a rough shove. The rogue cradled his arm, his drunken bravado vanishing as he stared up at the cold, calculating ice in her eyes. He scrambled backward and hurried away, melting into the crowd. Luna sat back, her heart rate completely steady. She looked up to see Silas standing a few feet away, holding a burlap sack of supplies. He had watched the entire exchange. A slow, deeply impressed smirk touched the corner of his mouth before he hid it away. "Time to go," he said quietly, sliding into the booth to shield her as she stood up. As they walked back to the truck, the silence was thick, but it was electric. "You handled yourself," Silas noted as he started the engine. "I learned that David has a new mate." Luna replied, her voice devoid of inflection. "He married the Bloodwood Alpha's daughter to merge the territories. My death was a business transaction." Silas put the truck in gear, his jaw tightening. "Are you all right?" Luna looked out the window at the passing trees, a dangerous, beautiful calm settling over her features. "I'm better than all right, Silas. I finally know the rules of the game he's playing, and I know exactly how to break the board." Spring brought not only warmer weather, but also the sprawling, aggressive reach of the newly bolstered Crescent Moon Pack. David's arrogance, fueled by his alliance with the Bloodwood Wolves, made him bold. His patrols began pushing further out, ignoring ancient territorial boundaries, searching for rogue camps to clear out and claim the land as his own. It was only a matter of time before they stumbled upon Silas's sanctuary. It happened on a misty Tuesday morning. Luna was practicing tracking techniques near the eastern stream, a mile from the cabin. She moved silently, her boots finding soft earth and moss, avoiding twigs and dry leaves. Silas had gone hunting further north, leaving her to guard the perimeter. She paused, raising her head. The damp morning air carried a sudden, jarring scent. It wasn't the smell of a lone, desperate rogue. It was the organized, disciplined scent of a pack patrol. And the underlying notes, pine, ash, and leather, belonged distinctly to Crescent Moon. Luna dropped instantly into a low crouch behind a thick cluster of ferns. Her heart hammered a steady, rhythmic beat against her ribs. This wasn't a drill. 3 figures emerged from the mist, walking in a loose, triangular formation. They were entirely in human form, carrying heavy tactical crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts, standard issue for David's border guards. As they drew closer, the mist thinned, revealing their faces. Luna's stomach plummeted. Leading the patrol was Marcus. He was a beta of the Crescent Moon, a man she had once considered a close friend. He had stood by her side during pack ceremonies. They had shared meals at the Alpha's table. Now, he was trespassing on the land of the man who had saved her life. Hunting for blood. "Spread out," Marcus ordered, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet woods. The scouts said they smelled old wood smoke in this sector. If there's a rogue camp, we burn it. The Alpha wants this valley cleared by the weekend. Luna's jaw tightened. They were going to burn Silas's home. The 2 guards flanked out, moving away from Marcus. Luna did the math instantly. If she shifted into a wolf, The fight would be noisy and brutal, and she risked taking a silver bolt. She had to use the environment. She had to be a ghost. She slipped backward, using the thick ferns as cover, circling widely to get behind the guard on the right flank. He was young, moving heavily, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground ahead of him. He wasn't checking his 6 o'clock. Luna waited until he stepped behind a massive oak tree, obscuring him from Marcus's line of sight. She moved. She didn't run. She glided. In 3 silent strides, she was behind him. She clamped one hand clamped firmly over his mouth to muffle his shout, while her other arm wrapped around his neck, applying precise, punishing pressure to the carotid artery. The guard thrashed, dropping his crossbow. But Luna held tight, pivoting her weight to drag him silently to the ground. Within 6 seconds, he went limp, unconscious but alive. She dragged him into a patch of thick briars, securing his hands with zip ties Silas had taught her to carry. One down, she melted back into the shadows, moving toward the second guard. This one was older, more alert. He had stopped, looking back toward where his partner had been. "Hey, Jensen," he hissed. "You see something?" Luna didn't give him time to raise his weapon. She dropped from a low-hanging branch directly behind him, the momentum driving him face first into the dirt. Before he could react, she drove her knee into the small of his back and brought the heavy hilt of her hunting knife down hard against his temple. The hollow crack echoed slightly, and the guard slumped into the mud. "Jensen? Miller?" Marcus's voice rang out, laced with sudden panic. The snapping of twigs indicated he was rushing toward the sound of the scuffle. Luna stood slowly, wiping a speck of mud from her cheek. She didn't hide. She stepped out into the middle of the narrow deer trail, waiting. Marcus burst through the bushes, his crossbow raised and leveled at her chest. He stopped dead in his tracks, the weapon trembling in his hands. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the impossibility standing before him. "Luna?" he whispered, his face draining of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. In a way, he had. She didn't look like the gentle, supportive Luna he remembered. She stood tall, dressed in dark tactical gear, her eyes cold, hard, and devoid of any warmth. "Hello, Marcus," she said calmly, making no move to surrender. You're dead," he stammered, lowering the crossbow slightly in his confusion. "David said the rogues tore you apart. We had a funeral." "David is a liar," Luna replied smoothly. "And you are trespassing." You took down my men?" Marcus looked around frantically, suddenly realizing he was alone. The realization sparked a defensive panic. He raised the crossbow again, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're a rogue now. I have my orders." Luna didn't flinch. "You shoot that bolt, Marcus, and you will be dead before it hits the ground. You know I'm faster than you. I always was." It was a gamble, but a calculated one. Marcus hesitated. He remembered her sparring sessions. He knew her speed. In that fraction of a second of hesitation, Luna closed the distance. She slapped the front of the crossbow aside, stepping inside his guard. She grabbed his combat vest, sweeping his legs out from under him with brutal efficiency. Marcus hit the ground hard, the crossbow flying from his grasp. Before he could draw his sidearm, Luna was on top of him, the razor-sharp edge of her hunting knife pressed snugly against the pulse point on his throat. He froze, his chest heaving, staring up into the eyes of a woman he no longer recognized. "I could kill you right now," Luna whispered, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly register. "But I need a messenger." She leaned in closer, ensuring he caught the scent of her power, raw and untethered from any pack bond. "You go back to David," she commanded, pressing the blade just enough to leave a thin line of red on his skin. "You tell him that his borders mean nothing to me. Tell him his new alliance won't save him. And tell him that the ghost of the woman he left to die is coming to collect." She stood up abruptly, sheathing her knife in one fluid motion. She stepped back into the mist. "Take your men and run, Marcus. If I see you on this land again, you won't leave it." The message had been delivered. Now, they had to prepare for the fallout. Silas didn't celebrate Luna's victory over Marcus and his patrol. Instead, he doubled down on their preparations. The cabin, once a quiet sanctuary, was transformed into a war room. "David won't let this go," Silas said that evening, spreading a worn, hand-drawn map of the surrounding territories across the small dining table. He weighed the corners down with spare magazines. "He's an alpha who just got humiliated on his own border by a ghost. His ego will demand retaliation." Luna stood across from him, studying the map. The Crescent Moon territory, outlined in red, looked massive, especially with the newly added Bloodwood lands marked in jagged purple to the south. Their small sliver of neutral territory, a rugged valley caught between jagged peaks, felt precariously small. "He'll send a full assault force," Luna deduced, her voice steady. 6 months ago, the thought of facing David's army would have paralyzed her. Now, she viewed it as a tactical problem to be solved. "He'll want to make an example of this rogue camp." "Exactly," Silas agreed, his finger tracing a narrow pass that led into their valley. "They'll come through the Devil's Throat. It's the only way to move a large force quickly through these mountains." He looked up at her, the flickering lamplight casting deep shadows across his face. "2 of us can't hold the pass against a unified pack, Luna, no matter how good we are." "I know," she replied softly. She had been thinking about this since Marcus ran. She traced a line on the map with her finger, moving away from Crescent Moon territory, deep into the unclaimed, dangerous lands to the west. "That's why we aren't going to fight alone." Silas raised an eyebrow. "You have friends hiding in the woods?" "Not friends," Luna corrected, "but enemies of my enemy." She pointed to a cluster of markings Silas had made on the western edge of the map. "You've mentioned the scattered rogue camps out here. Wolves who were cast out, wolves who refuse to bow to tyrants like David. They survive, but they don't thrive. They are disorganized, paranoid, and violently territorial," Silas warned, crossing his arms. "Trying to ally with them is like trying to herd feral cats." "They are hungry," Luna countered, her eyes meeting his with fierce determination. "And they hate the established packs. David's expansion threatens them as much as it threatens us. If he takes this valley, he won't stop until he controls the entire mountain range." Silas was quiet for a long moment, studying her. He was looking for hesitation, but he found none. The woman who had needed him to scrape her off the pavement was gone. In her place was a strategist, a leader. "You want to unite the rogues?" he stated, a hint of genuine awe coloring his usually stoic tone. "I want to offer them a choice," Luna said. "Fight David on their own terms, divided and weak, and eventually lose. Or fight with us, break his grip on these mountains, and claim their own territory." The next morning, before the sun had even crested the peaks, they set out. Silas knew the locations of several large rogue encampments, hidden deep within treacherous ravines and dense, old-growth forests. Their first stop was an encampment led by a massive, heavily scarred wolf named Kyle. Kyle had once been a prominent beta in a neighboring pack until he was ousted in a bloody coup. He was suspicious, aggressive, and commanded a rough group of about 20 hardened survivors. When Silas and Luna stepped into the clearing of Cale's camp, they were immediately surrounded. The air was thick with tension and the smell of unwashed bodies and wood smoke. Cale emerged from a dilapidated canvas tent, towering over even Silas. "Silas," Cale rumbled, his yellow eyes narrowing. "You have nerve bringing a pack scent into my camp." He sniffed the air, looking at Luna. "Even if it is a dead woman's scent." Luna didn't flinch. She stepped forward, ignoring the snarls of the rogues circling them. She didn't emit the submissive scent a rogue usually offered a camp leader. She stood tall, projecting calm authority. "The scent is dead, because the woman I was is dead," Luna said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent camp. "I am Luna, and I know David of the Crescent Moon better than anyone." She didn't plead. She didn't ask for their help. She laid out the facts. She told them about David's alliance with Bloodwood, his plan to sweep the mountains, and the inevitable destruction of their meager existence if they did nothing. "He thinks you are vermin," Luna told the assembled rogues, her gaze sweeping over their hardened, desperate faces. "He thinks you are weak because you have no alpha. I say you are strong because you survived without one." Cale scoffed, though the dismissal lacked its initial venom. "Big words for a rejected mate. What do you propose we do? Throw ourselves at his border patrols?" "No," Luna replied, a cold smile touching her lips. "I propose we let him come to us. He will march an army into the devil's throat to find me. We will trap him there. We break his army. We break his power." She looked directly into Kyle's eyes. "Fight with me, Cale. Help me break his hold, and the eastern slopes of this valley are yours. Uncontested." It took 3 days. 3 days of tense negotiations, displays of strength, and leveraging Silas's formidable reputation. But by the time they returned to the cabin, they were no longer just 2 isolated survivors. They had an army of ghosts. 60 hardened, desperate rogues, united not by a mystical mate bond or a political alpha, but by a shared hatred of tyranny and a desire to finally stop running. The crucible was over. The war had begun. The air in the devil's throat was always cold, trapped between sheer rock walls that rose hundreds of feet into the gray sky. It was a narrow, treacherous pass, the only viable route for a large group to enter the valley where Silas's cabin sat. It was also a perfect bottleneck. Luna stood on a high, concealed ledge overlooking the pass. The wind whipped her dark hair around her face, but she felt no chill. The adrenaline humming in her veins kept her warm. Below her, hidden among the rocks, the crevices, and the dense tree line at the valley floor, her army of ghosts waited in absolute silence. Silas crouched beside her, a heavy, customized hunting rifle resting across his knees. He was scanning the far end of the pass through the scope. "Movement," he murmured quietly. Luna pulled a small pair of binoculars from her tactical vest. Through the lenses, the distant shapes resolved into a formidable force. David hadn't held back. He was leading a contingent of at least 40 wolves, a mix of his own Crescent Moon guards and the heavier, brutish enforcers from his new Bloodwood alliance. They were marching in human form, a tactical choice indicating they expected a prolonged siege of the rogue camp, not a skirmish in the pass. Luna's breath caught as she focused on the figure at the front of the column. David. He looked exactly the same. Tall, impossibly handsome, exuding an aura of arrogant, untouchable power. He wore expensive tactical gear that looked like it had never seen actual combat. The sight of him, the man who had ordered her death and casually tossed her aside, didn't evoke the crushing sorrow it once had. Instead, it triggered a cold, precise calculus in her mind. He brought a lot of weight, Silas noted, tracking the heavy weapons carried by the Bloodwood enforcers. They plan to level the valley. They won't make it to the valley, Luna replied, her voice devoid of emotion. She reached for the small, encrypted radio clipped to her vest. It was a risk using tech, but necessary to coordinate the ambush. Positions, she breathed into the mic. 2 clicks echoed in her earpiece. Kyle's team, holding the high ground on the opposite side of the pass, was ready. 2 more clicks confirmed the ground team, hidden in the scrub at the exit of the gorge, was in place. They waited. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down on them as David's forces marched deeper into the narrow gorge. The sound of their heavy boots crunching on loose rock echoed off the canyon walls, masking the subtle shifts of the rogues preparing to strike. Luna watched David's face through the binoculars. He looked bored, annoyed by the inconvenience of having to personally oversee the destruction of a rogue camp. He believed he was walking into a slaughter. He was right. Wait for it, Luna whispered, more to herself than to Silas. David's vanguard reached the narrowest point of the pass, directly below Luna's position. Now, she ordered into the radio. The trap sprang with terrifying precision from the high ridges on both sides of the pass. Large, precariously balanced boulders were shoved loose. They plummeted down the sheer rock faces, crashing into the canyon floor with deafening roars, shattering into deadly shrapnel. The crescent moon formation instantly shattered in panic. Shouts of alarm were cut short as the falling debris decimated their center line. Before the dust could even settle, the rogues attacked. Kale's team rained down a volley of heavy crossbow bolts from the ridges, pinning the surviving pack wolves behind sparse cover. The discipline of David's forces crumbled under the sudden, brutal assault. They weren't fighting a disorganized rabble. They were fighting a coordinated military strike. "Ground team, advance," Luna commanded. From the exit of the gorge, the rest of the rogues surged forward. They didn't shift into wolves. They fought in human form, utilizing the brutal, close-quarters combat skills they had honed to survive in the wild. They hit the vanguard like a tidal wave. Luna didn't stay on the ridge to watch. She stood up, sliding the binoculars into her pouch and drawing her hunting knife. "I'm going down," she told Silas, her eyes fixed on the chaotic melee below. Silas didn't try to stop her. He knew this was her fight. He simply nodded, shifting his rifle to provide cover fire. "I have your 6. Luna moved down the treacherous goat path with practiced speed, her boots finding purchase on the slick rock. She entered the fray near the rear of David's column, instantly moving into the deadly dance Silas had drilled into her for months. She ducked a wild swing from a massive Bloodwood enforcer, pivoting sharply to drive the hilt of her knife into his kidney before sweeping his legs out. She didn't linger to finish him. She moved on, fluid and lethal, a ghost among the chaos. She was looking for one man. The battle raged around her, a cacophony of shouts, the clash of steel, and the sickening thuds of hand-to-hand combat. The rogues were fighting with the desperate fury of wolves who had nothing left to lose, overwhelming the pampered, arrogant pack guards. Finally, through the swirling dust and smoke, she saw him. David was backed against the canyon wall, fighting off 2 rogues with a heavy tactical baton. He was skilled, his alpha strength allowing him to hold them at bay. But he looked panicked. His pristine gear was torn, his face smeared with dirt and someone else's blood. Luna stepped over a groaning guard and walked slowly toward him. The 2 rogues, sensing her approach and recognizing her authority, backed away, rejoining the wider skirmish. David turned, his chest heaving, his baton raised to strike. He stopped dead, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he recognized the woman standing before him. "Luna?" he breathed, the word a ragged gasp. She stood amidst the carnage of his broken army, her dark clothes stained with dust, her eyes burning with a cold, unrelenting fire. She wasn't the sweet, submissive mate he had discarded. She was a weapon forged in the very hell he had condemned her to. "Hello, David," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the battle, clear and deadly. "I told you I wasn't a liability." The battle around them seemed to fade into a distant blur. For Luna, the narrow gorge, the shouting rogues, and the bleeding pack wolves ceased to exist. There was only the space between her and David, thick with years of history, betrayal, and the sharp scent of impending violence. David lowered his baton slightly, his handsome face twisting into a mask of disbelief and rapidly rising anger. "How are you alive?" he demanded, his alpha command lacing his words, an instinctive attempt to force her submission. A year ago, that tone would have brought her to her knees. Now, it washed over her like a weak breeze. "You didn't cut deep enough," Luna replied, her grip tightening on the handle of her knife. "And you left me with someone who knew how to put the pieces back together." David's eyes darted upward, scanning the ridges, perhaps finally realizing the tactical brilliance of the ambush. He looked back at her, his lips curling into a sneer. "You allied with rogues? You've degraded yourself, Luna. You were a Luna of a noble pack. Now you're just a savage leading scavengers." "I am surviving," she countered smoothly, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "Something you know nothing about. You inherited your power, David. You married into more of it. You've never had to fight for anything in your life." His pride, fragile and easily bruised, flared. He couldn't abide being spoken down to, especially by someone he considered beneath him. With a roar of fury, he lunged. He moved with the supernatural speed and strength of an alpha, his baton swinging in a deadly arc aimed at her head. Luna didn't flinch. She had anticipated the strike. She dropped low, the heavy baton whistling mere inches over her hair. As she ducked, she pivoted, driving her elbow hard into the unarmored gap beneath his ribs, the exact same spot where his knife had pierced her months ago. David grunted, stumbling slightly, but his momentum carried him forward. He recovered instantly, spinning back to deliver a backhand strike. Luna parried with her forearm, the impact jarring her bones, but she held her ground. She was smaller, weaker in raw strength, but Silas had taught her that power was meaningless without precision. She didn't fight his strength. She redirected it. She twisted her arm, trapping his wrist, and stepped inside his guard. She brought the pommel of her knife up, smashing it against his jaw. The crack echoed sharply. David staggered backward, spitting blood, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and growing terror. He wasn't fighting the gentle woman he had known. He was fighting a phantom who anticipated every move. "You can't win this," David snarled, wiping blood from his mouth. "My pack will hunt you down. The Bloodwood Alpha will see you destroyed. Your pack is broken in this gorge," Luna stated coldly, gesturing to the canyon floor. The sounds of fighting were dying down. The rogues had overwhelmed the remaining guards. "And your alliance was built on my blood. I am here to collect the debt." David panicked. He realized he was losing, not just the physical fight, but the psychological one. He abandoned strategy and rushed her, relying on brute force, seeking to grapple and overpower her. It was a fatal mistake. As he lunged, arms outstretched, Luna stepped smoothly to the side. A maneuver she had practiced 1,000 times in the snow with Silas. She used David's own forward momentum against him, grabbing his tactical vest and pulling him sharply forward as she swept his lead leg. David hit the ground with bone-rattling force. Before he could even draw a breath to recover, Luna was on him. She drove her knee into the center of his chest, pinning him to the dirt, and pressed the razor-sharp edge of her knife firmly against his throat. He froze, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and terrified as he stared up at the woman he had tried to kill. The silence in the gorge was sudden and profound. The fighting had stopped. The rogues, bruised and bloody, formed a loose circle around them, watching in breathless anticipation. Kyle stood near the front, a grim smile of respect on his scarred face. High on the ridge, Silas lowered his rifle, watching the scene unfold below. "Do it," David rasped, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound defiant. "Kill me. Show them you're nothing but a murderer." Luna looked down at him. She saw the sweat on his brow, the frantic pulse beating against her blade, the desperate fear in his eyes. She felt the heavy, intoxicating pull of revenge. One quick motion, and the man who had destroyed her life would be gone. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the cold logic Silas had instilled in her wash over the hot embers of her rage. "Killing you would be easy," Luna said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet canyon. "It would be a mercy you didn't offer me." She slowly withdrew the knife, rising to her feet and stepping back. David lay there for a moment, stunned, before scrambling into a sitting position, eyeing her warily. "I'm not going to kill you, David," Luna announced, turning to address the surviving Crescent Moon guards, who were kneeling, surrounded by KL's rogues. "I want you to go back to your pack house. I want you to walk in there, beaten, bruised, and alone." She turned back to David, her gaze piercing. "I want you to tell them that you led your finest warriors into a trap and got them slaughtered. I want you to tell your new bloodwood mate that her father's enforcers were broken by a woman you threw away." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper meant only for him. "You are an alpha in name only now. Your strength is a lie. When they see how easily you were broken, your pack will turn on you. Your new allies will abandon you. You will lose everything, slowly, day by day, knowing that the ghost you created is out here, waiting." David swallowed hard, the magnitude of his defeat settling over him. Death would have been quick. This was a systemic dismantling of his entire life. "Get up," Luna commanded, her voice ringing with true authority. David slowly stood, his shoulders slumped, his alpha aura completely extinguished. He looked around at his captured men, then at the ring of fierce rogues. He had lost. "Take your wounded and get off my land," Luna said, turning her back on him, the ultimate dismissal. She walked through the parted crowd of rogues, not looking back as David gathered the shattered remnants of his force and began the long, humiliating walk back out of the gorge. As the canyon cleared, Silas descended from the ridge, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He walked up to Luna, stopping beside her. "You let him live," Silas observed quietly, his tone unreadable. Luna looked up at him, the tension finally draining from her shoulders. She felt a profound, exhausting peace. "I didn't let him live, Silas. I ended him. A dead martyr is dangerous. A broken, humiliated alpha is a cautionary tale." Silas studied her face for a long moment, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a rare, genuine smile. "Logic over emotion," he murmured. "Exactly," Luna agreed, feeling the subtle, warm tension hum between them again, stronger now that the ghost of her past had been exorcised. "So," Silas asked, looking around the canyon, now firmly under their control. What does the new Alpha of the Western Ridges command? Luna looked at the man who had saved her, trained her, and believed in her when she was nothing. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She had built a kingdom from the ashes of her betrayal. "Let's go home," she said. "Thank you for reading Rejected, Betrayed, and Left to Die." She returned stronger than every Alpha. If you enjoyed Luna's journey from a broken, betrayed mate to a powerful, calculating leader who forged her own destiny, please hit that like button. Share this story with fellow romance and drama lovers who appreciate a strong, strategic heroine. And don't forget to subscribe for more intense, twist-filled dramatic fiction. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see what happens next with Luna, Silas, and their newly forged alliance.